Hello and welcome, Exiles. Now, after patch notes, nothing really got touched that nerfed the build. Main thing I was worried about was maybe ArchNemesis taking a nerf. Didn't get touched, so I think we're all good. And I ended up spending a lot more time on the PoB, putting in things like leveling trees, as well as I tried out basically looking at a regular block tree versus a glancing blow block tree. And I ended up deciding I think I like the glancing blow block tree more just because it's a little bit more consistent with ArchNemesis being procced on blocks because you can get both 75 attack and spell block fairly easily, requires a little bit less passives, and we can put those extra passives into a bit better damage and maybe not require such a high level tree. Right now I have planned out level 95. I think that should be fairly easy to hit. This is going to be a pretty tanky build. I went ahead and I made some generic rares for most of the gear slots and a couple uniques with ArchNemesis and Crown of the Inward Eye. This should all be really quite achievable. I was basically just going for like 3 mod items where they just had kind of 3 decent stats for the build and maybe a benchcraft. So you'll see on all these items as I scroll over them, they shouldn't really be super expensive. They should definitely be achievable. Honestly, by the time you're getting into like yellow maps, I think you should have been able to buy items this good for a couple C here, a couple C there. And then, of course, the bench crafts, you just have to do some Betrayal, unveil the hybrid Fire and Chaos, Lightning and Chaos, Cold and Chaos. These crafts are great for balancing your resistances as well as helping yourself get to 75 Chaos Res. I really think it's worth doing. There's a lot of things that deal Chaos damage these days, and getting that capped out just feels great because Chaos damage mobs just don't really touch you very much once you have capped Chaos Res, and it just feels good. So that's it for the gearing. I basically tried to stick to 3 mod items that were just kind of okay mods, nothing too expensive, see what we could get in terms of life, what we can get in terms of resistances, see what damage we're kind of looking at here. So to start things off with, our life pool looks like it's going to be around 6 to 7,000 depending on how min-maxed you get the gearing on life, but for the base, like early end of gearing, it's going to be 6k life roughly if you make sure you have life on every piece of gear, and about 2500 ES. So we're going to be around the 8 to 9k EHP in the early gearing stage, which is a really nice EHP number. I like that a lot. And then in combination with that, we're going to have Glancing Blow Block with ArchNemesis giving us about 600 energy shield back every time we block, which is a nice extra layer of sustain and mitigation. So for our mitigation layers, we have fairly good armor, ArchNemesis with some nice capped glancing blow block, and then we're going to have fairly good regen as well. So now, in terms of regen, you'll see here it says we have basically 1200 life regen and just a small net regen on our energy shield. Basically what we're doing is we're leveraging Pious Path from InquisiTHOR, which doubles our regen onto our ES pool, so that the ES pool is tanking the degen from Righteous Fire. Where is that? Righteous Fire, which is giving us about 40% more damage when we have it on, which I'm planning to have it on all the time. And then when we're taking hits, ArchNemesis is sustaining our energy shield pool. So hopefully when we're basically in sort of intense situations where a lot of things are hitting us, all the small hits are giving us net positive returns on our energy shield and will help sustain our net energy shield. One of the biggest ways to die in Path of Exile is getting shotgunned, and ArchNemesis is basically making you shotgun proof, because if you take a whole bunch of small hits, a whole bunch of those small hits are going to give you back ES and then make it a lot less likely you die to shotgun type damage. And then looking at our offensive layer, after talking about defensive, we're going to be sitting around 1,000,000 is going to be low because Crackling Lance got like a 50% damage boost. And this is just Crackling Lance. I didn't go and make a skill setup for all the other lightning skills, but I'm sure they'll be decent as well. I'm probably going to try them myself, but right now I'm leaning towards Crackling Lance. So that's, right now we're going to be looking at probably 1.5 million if you consider that Crackling Lance is getting a 50% damage boost. And then this also doesn't include Frost Shield, which will cap our crit. And then if we get Sigil of Power and we start getting effect from that, that'll give us more damage as well. In the configuration, I have only a 25 shock. I think we'll be able to get higher than this because we have about, I want to say it's like 70% ailment effect on our tree. And then we're hitting decently. We're going to be hitting for like 500, 600k. I think we can get some pretty solid shocks. This will probably go up closer to 40, 50 maybe even. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. But I thought conservative, I'll just say 25 for how much shock we'll be able to put on the boss, but I think we'll be able to do more. Okay, and this is also on Intensity 4. So when you're single targeting a boss, I'm planning for the build to basically be face tankable on most bosses, so we can just sit there and cast and maintain our intensity stack, because we're using Crackling Lance. It's super important to maintain the intensity stacks for DPS, and then not have the intensity stacks while we're mapping. I did put an Apex mode into the build. I'm not sure this is actually going to be necessary. I'm probably going to try it with and without the Apex mode. It kind of just depends on how fast our cast time is. Right now in the PoE, it's 3 casts per second, which is pretty good for getting our intensity stacks up in basically a second. So maybe it won't be necessary to have an Apex mode, in which case we could swap this out for a generic rare jewel, go up in damage, go up in life, stuff like that. But I thought I'd have this in there just in case. It might just feel so much better to have Apex mode. So I might try that, compare with and without it, whether or not it seems like it's worth it. That covers our offenses mostly. I should say, in terms of offensive damage, I looked at Orb of Storms because I was thinking, okay, Orb of Storms seems like it maybe would be a cool lightning supplemental damage. But if it's only in a 4-link, and I put Orb of Storms here, it is only doing about 40k a hit, which with the buffs and everything, it's going to be maybe like 10 to 15% more damage. I'm not sure that's worth all the gem slots and recasting it every time the boss moves. So this, I'm not too sure. I'll probably try it in the build with and without, but I think I'm leaning towards not ending up using this. But I did look into it just to see what I thought it would be in terms of our DPS, how much it would help us. And for the tree, I probably mentioned this before, but I did include leveling trees. So that way you have a good idea of when to grab what passives and all those sorts of things. So that way, say I'm not streaming and you still want to get updates on where you should be putting your passive, stuff like that, you could just go in here and go on to the various levels of the tree and work from there. I also went ahead and did a small notes section, basically going over the basics of what to aim for gear-wise. It's mostly just rares with life and res. That's the main takeaway. Some things you want to aim for key stats, like regen rate will be huge on rare items. Things like cast speed on jewelry is now a fairly good stat, so you definitely want to try to prioritize that on your jewelry if you can get it. And then crit multi is also a really good stat on your amulet. Stuff like that I went over. And then until we get Aegis Aurora, it's going to be a rare shield, maybe a Rise of the Phoenix, something cheap until we can afford Aegis Aurora. Aegis Aurora is generally a pretty common drop, so it shouldn't be too expensive, but time will tell when the league starts. Maybe we'll have to run with a rare for a longer amount of time, but that'll be okay. Rare shields will be more DPS, but just quite a bit less sustain in defenses, but it'll be fine until we get an Aegis Aurora to replace it. As for flasks, I go over this. It's basically just the gain charges when hit mod. Just get that, prioritize it on all your utility flasks. It'll make flask uptime like 100%, and it feels so good. Best prefix mod there is. And then for suffix mods, you'll see on my flasks, I went for armor on the granite, I went for crit on the diamond, I went for movement speed on the quicksilver. These are kind of some ideal affixes, but you could get crit on your granite, you could get armor on your diamond. It doesn't really matter which flask is it on, because if the flask is active, you're getting the benefits. You don't have to like match crit with diamond and so on and so forth. And frankly, we might not end up needing this crit. Depending on how much strength in it you get in the build, we're going to be overcapped on getting 100% crit, I believe. And then Ruby Flask here, we do this because it'll help us maintain our Righteous Fire with a net positive regen on our Ender Shield, as well as eventually if you unveil mods from the Katarina Cinder Swallow Flask, we can get the regen mod, which is super nice for extra sustain. So those are all our utility flasks, and then for our mana flask, it's just an enduring mana flask with Remove Corrupted Blood. I always view the ailments that are deadly is Corrupted Blood, Shock, and Freeze. The ailments like Brittle and Scorch you don't ever run into except for Simulacrum, so they're like a non-issue. And Ignite really isn't too bad of an issue if you have good regen, which we do. So for the most part, this should mitigate all the deadly ailments we could come into if we have a solution for Bleed, Corrupted Blood, Shock, and Freeze. And for us, we solve Freeze with Brine King, Reduced Effective Chill. Those all feel great. And then we also have a immune to lightning, or not immune to lightning, immune to shock via the Tempest Shield. Speaking of auras, I tested out a few different setups of what I thought could work. My priority auras are Determination, Defiance Banner, and Tempest Shield. These are very good defensively. when we have the build set up to get the aura nodes, once we've picked up these mana efficiency nodes, then you can include things like vitality, like purity of fire. I thought these are the priority until you get enough extra regen from better gearing, more GG gearing, at which point if you can sustain energy shield without these two, you can swap into something like a Wrath, which will be 21% more damage, and it could be a big improvement to the DPS of the build. But initially, though, for the most part, I think I'm going to do Purity of Fire and Vitality until I get better regen gear into the build. Another thing I want to say is, as far as Vitality is concerned, this thing you can level and de-level to increase how much extra unreserved mana you have. Right now I have it set up so I have 64 unreserved mana. If this is too uncomfortable for casting Crackling Lance, which it might be, then we might have to de-level it more to get more freed up mana space, stuff like that. Play around with it. The higher level you are, the better gear you have, the larger your mana pool is going to be, and that'll affect how much percentage of your mana pool Vitality is reserving. So if you have a smaller mana pool, this might have to be a lower level until you can afford to get until you leveled up and get a better, bigger mana pool, at which point you can actually increase the level, and so on and so forth until it gets to a point where you can't cast your spell. You always need enough mana unreserved to be able to cast a spell, obviously. As for utility skills, Flame Dash, Shield Charge, Faster Attacks, these are our movement skills. I think these should work fine. And then utility skills, we have Frost Shield, Sigil of Power. These are basically bossing only. You'll see when we have these active, our DPS goes way up. But you'll notice on the PoB, the net regen for Energy Shield goes way down. The reason this is Frost Shield technically gives you a 730 Energy Shield degen per second, and it only lasts 1 second. But the Frost Shield itself will last a long time and give you a lot of extra tanking potential. So I have this unchecked so you can, at most points during the build, you'll have a net Energy Shield regen, but whenever you proc this to set up for a boss, it will degen you for a second. Sigil of Power, it will be nice damage if you can get more stages. I just have this set at 1 stage. I'm not sure how much mana we're going to be able to spend to generate enough stages, but say you could get all the way up to a stage 4, it obviously will increase your damage significantly, but that'll be pretty hard to do. It requires you to spend quite a bit of mana, so I'm not sure how well that will work DPS-wise, but I think it should be fairly solid. It also has like an extra layer of mitigation. It says enemies in area deal less damage while maximum stages. So if you can get to maximum stages, not only will you be getting a lot more damage, but you'll also be making the enemies inside deal 20% less damage, which is a huge defensive layer. And then of course we have Molten Shell and increased duration. This is pretty much just an extra layer of defense that works pretty well if we have 30k armor. Ideally, you want to get closer to 50k to get max benefit out of Molten Shell, which maybe with some better gearing we can do, but for right now, it looks like we're going to be pretty comfortable at 30k with the initial early gearing of the build, and that should be fine. That should still feel quite safe. And then Assassin's Mark, this is basically just casted on a boss. Marks now last the entire duration of the fight, and they're permanent, so it's pretty much just the boss spawns, you cast Assassin's Mark, you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the fight. And that's a huge DPS increase, obviously increases our crit and our crit multi, all good things there from Assassin's Mark. Alright, and then Crackling Lance, DPS-wise, this might not be the best. Arcane Surge is fairly good, but it might be better for me to swap this link out and then proc Arcane Surge with another skill. So I might do that. I'm not 100% sure, but for right now, these are the links I have set up. The main things are increased crit damage, Inspiration to help make the mana cost not so bad, and then Intensify is our tier 1 best support because it works so well with intensity stacks with Crackling Lance. So those are the main links I have set up here. I'm sure maybe I'll be trying out other links and maybe I'll update this, but for right now, those are the links I'm going with. And it'll be pretty similar stuff for other lightning skills. Of course, if you do like lightning tendrils, that'll be a channeling skill. You'll want to use infused channeling, and there will be other niche cases where the skill you won't want to use Intensify for, depending on what skill you use, stuff like that. It all kind of varies, so to speak. So that is the deal with the skill setup there. All right, I think I covered most of the things. I ended up deciding to go with Alira, Brine King, Tukahama. Tukahama will be nice extra regen. I don't think this regen's even included in our PoB here. Yeah, it's not. The numbers don't change because I don't know where the setting is to say, hey, I'm stationary, I'm face tanking the boss, give me my 2% regen. I don't know where that setting is. So we'll even have more regen than we do have here. But that is the basics of the setup. For our anointment, I just went for a cheap one of Stormweaver. I ended up unspecking out of this because I switched around the tree and stuff, but I think it's a solid anointment, but maybe there's some better damage anointments. I didn't look too long and hard on it, but I thought this was a decent one for not a lot of oils. I'm sure there's some other good options. I didn't want to include anything expensive, so anything that had an opalescent or higher oil, I was just like, no, that's too expensive. So that is the setup for the build. Put some extra time into figuring out the POB, giving some notes and information on gearing and auras and utility and all that sort of stuff. So that way, hopefully, come LeagueStart, if you're not able to tune in the stream to ask me questions when you have them, this POB will be able to give you information on when to get things. Of course, I will try to stream LeagueStart. I don't know how it will go with the babies. We're going to try to see how it goes. Maybe it won't work, but we're going to give it our best shot to be able to try to stream the first couple weeks of the league if we can. And then when we play each day, at the end of the day, I'm going to do an update video. And I'm going to say, hey, this is how far I got with the character. This is how it's performing. Oh, I made these changes to it, etc., etc. So that way, at the end of each day, you can get an update video on the build to see, okay, how's it performing? Did he change anything? Stuff like that to give you an idea of where the character's going and how it's performing. So that's the main plans for the character. I'm pretty happy with this. Being able to have an expected DPS of around 1 to 2 million with just level 20 gems. I think that's pretty solid. I'm pretty happy with that. And then a good defensive layer of having a high EHP pool with some good sustain between our life regen, between Aegis Aurora, capped glancing blow block. I think this will end up feeling fairly tanky, fairly safe in most circumstances, and I think it'll be decent at bossing, but, you know, we'll see when we actually get in there. Maybe the Syrian Exart and the Eater of Worlds and all those boss fights are very, very difficult, and I might end up needing something stronger, but I think this should be really pretty solid for LeagueStart, all things considered. It's not going to be overpowered. It's not going to be dealing 10 million damage per second on ignites like EA Ballistas, but I think it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to play it. So that is the update on the Inquisitor. Hopefully this helps you guys decide whether or not you want to play it or not. And then, you know, if you're still unsure, you can always just wait for me to be playing it in League and give updates and actual in-game footage of how the build's performing, so that way you can have a better idea if it's a build you want to play. Anyways, that's the update. Hopefully you guys like it. I tried to spend some time making sure I ironed out and tested a decent amount of stuff in PoE. Usually I don't like to build a bunch of items in PoE, and I don't like to figure out what my numbers will be. I just like to experiment and go with it. But I'm figuring now, you know, for League Starts, people really want to know what they're getting into, and it should be something I should put some time into. But I think in the future for League Starts, I'm going to try to at least put this level of effort into giving you guys a perspective of how good or how strong the build will be on a League Start, what you can expect of it performance-wise, what the PoE numbers look like, stuff like that. So that way you know what you're getting into. It takes a little bit of the fun out for me because, you know, I like the experimentation. I like the thrill of not knowing how well something will perform. But at the same time, I can see the need for actually having a good idea of what you can expect. So that way you're not going into this blind being like, okay, I'm rolling the dice. So that's why I ended up going forward and doing this. The POB will be in the description below. Hopefully you guys like it, and I will see you guys on LeagueStart planning to stream it. Thank you all for watching. Have an excellent day, Exiles.